Did you know that God had a wife who was systematically erased from history? And what if I told you that even mentioning this archaeological fact triggers certain people harder than asking them if they like pineapple on their pizza? Look, I get it. Some of you are already having strong emotional reactions to the idea that we're going to discuss divine marriage, goddess worship, and other concepts that your Sunday school teacher probably didn't cover. And some of you are probably already scanning the visuals to see the AI-generated images so you can leave angry comments about fake imagery, as if hand-drawn pictures of ancient gods would somehow be more real. So here's my public service announcement. This video is created for academic and informational purposes. I'm going to use the same terms that appear in ancient inscriptions, the same language that scholars use in peer-reviewed research, and whatever visual aids, whether that's stock footage or AI imagery, to best help explain these complex historical concepts. If any of that offends your delicate sensibilities, there's probably a nice cat video waiting for you somewhere else on YouTube. With all of that out of the way, I'm Alex Arnold, and I'll be your conductor on this journey today. I research every claim, I write every word, and I put together every frame of these videos myself using all the modern tools and old-fashioned detective work at my disposal. Everything you're about to hear comes from months and sometimes years of digging through archaeological reports, ancient texts, and scholarly research revealing one of history's most successful cover-ups. This is Arnie's Brain Train, where we tackle controversial historical topics with academic integrity and a healthy disregard for people who prefer their education pre-digested and controversy-free. All of my sources are meticulously listed in the description below because I actually back up my claims with rock-solid evidence. Today, we're going to be uncovering the forbidden wife of God that they erased from history. Let's go. Let's start with the evidence. In 1975, archaeologist William Deaver was digging in the ancient Israeli site of Khirbet el-Qom when he made a discovery that would challenge everything that scholars thought that they knew about ancient Hebrew religion. Carved into a tomb wall was an inscription that read, "Blessed be Uriyahu by Yahweh, and by his Asherah." Now, Yahweh is the Hebrew name for God, the deity that billions of people worship today. But Asherah? That name has been thoroughly removed from mainstream religious consciousness. Now, to be clear, this wasn't a random ancient graffiti. This was actually an 8th century BCE blessing carved out by devout believers, and it was just the beginning of evidence showing how religious authorities removed God's wife from history. Move forward to 1976, and archaeologists made another significant discovery at a site called Kuntalit Adred in the Sinai Peninsula. They found pottery shards with inscriptions mentioning Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, and Yahweh of Taman and his Asherah. Multiple locations spanning different regions across multiple time periods, all mentioning God's wife as a matter of common knowledge. But wait, it gets better. Remember those famous Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, tucked away in those ancient manuscripts are references to something called the Divine Council, essentially a heavenly court where Yahweh rules alongside other divine beings. And guess who's sitting pretty at his right hand? Our mysteriously erased girl, Asherah. The evidence actually extends beyond archaeological digs. In the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, it mentions Asherah by name over 40 times, but modern translations have consistently altered these references. Where ancient Hebrew texts clearly say Asherah, many English Bibles substitute grove or wooden pole instead. None of this is accidental mistranslation. This is systematic cover-up. Biblical scholars have known about this for decades, but somehow that information never makes it down to the people sitting in the pews every Sunday. So who was this goddess that's been systematically removed from history? Asherah wasn't a minor deity worshipped by small groups. She was the Queen of Heaven, the Mother Goddess, the divine feminine that balanced the masculine energy of Yahweh in what was originally a cosmic partnership that later religious authorities wanted forgotten. In the ancient Near East, Asherah went by many names. The Canaanites called her Lady Asherah of the Sea, recognizing her dominion over the primordial waters of creation. The Babylonians knew her as Ishtar, the fierce goddess of love and war. The Egyptians worshipped her as Isis, the divine mother who could resurrect the dead. But, regardless of the name or culture, she represented the same fundamental force: fertility, wisdom, protection, the nurturing mother figure who gave life to everything in existence. Now here's where it gets good. Archaeological evidence shows that ancient Israelites didn't just know about Asherah. They actively worshipped her alongside Yahweh in elaborate religious ceremonies that treated them as a divine power couple ruling heaven together. We're talking about household shrines in every home, temple decorations featuring both deities, and religious festivals that celebrated their cosmic marriage. The famous Queen of Heaven mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, that's Asherah, and the biblical text describes how Hebrew women would bake special cakes for her, burn expensive incense in her honor, and pour out precious drink offerings. None of this is a secret. These are all mainstream religious practices that were as normal as communion in a modern church. But here's what's particularly significant. Asherah wasn't just Yahweh's wife in some abstract sense. Ancient texts actually describe their relationship in surprisingly human terms. They had divine children together, they ruled the heavenly court as equal partners, they made decisions about human affairs through consultation, and they even had marital disputes that affected the earthly realm, causing droughts and famines when the divine couple had disagreements. Consider this. Every other major religion in the ancient world had divine couples at the top of their pantheons. The Greeks had Zeus and Hera ruling Olympus together. The Egyptians had Osiris and Isis, like we talked about, governing the afterlife as partners. The Mesopotamians had Marduk and Sarpanit controlling the cosmos through their sacred marriage. The Hebrew god, being the only cosmic bachelor, would have been the exception, not the rule. And one last thing to think about. The earliest Hebrew religion wasn't monotheistic at all. It was what scholars call monolatrous, meaning that they worshiped one primary god while acknowledging the existence of others. Yahweh and Asherah were the supreme power couple at the top of a divine hierarchy. The idea of one god ruling alone was a much later development with a very specific political agenda. Understanding the real history of religion isn't just about academic trivia. When fundamental beliefs held by billions of people today are based on edited, sanitized, politically motivated versions of much older traditions, it changes how we view authority, truth, and the stories that we tell ourselves about reality. This story is about more than just ancient gods. It's about how power structures sanitize our information. So if Asherah worship was so widespread and well documented, what happened? How did religious authorities manage to remove the wife of God so completely that most people today have never heard her name? This represents one of history's most successful information control campaigns. The removal of Asherah didn't happen overnight. It was a deliberate campaign that took centuries to complete. It began during what biblical scholars call the Deuteronomistic Reform, around the 7th century BCE, when religious and political leaders decided that Israel's problems could be solved by eliminating competing forms of worship. King Josiah of Judah, following the conveniently discovered book of Deuteronomy that supported his political agenda, launched what can only be described as a religious purge. The biblical text proudly describes how he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. But more importantly, he broke down the houses of the cult prostitutes that were in the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for Asherah. I promise that the king didn't care about these things just for the style. This was the systematic destruction of an entire religious tradition. King Josiah ordered the destruction of Asherah poles throughout the kingdom, demolished high places where she was worshipped, and essentially declared war on the divine feminine. They didn't just destroy the physical evidence, they rewrote history itself. Later biblical editors went back through older texts and systematically removed or altered references to Asherah worship. Where they couldn't remove her entirely, they demonized her, turning the Queen of Heaven into an evil foreign influence. This is how you erase a goddess from history. The process accelerated during the Babylonian exile when the Jewish elite were dragged off to Babylon in 586 BCE. Sitting in foreign captivity, they faced a crucial question. Why had their God allowed this catastrophe? The answer they came up with was brilliant in its simplicity. They had been punished for worshiping other gods alongside Yahweh, including his wife Asherah. This brilliant narrative served multiple purposes. It explained their suffering while preserving God's power. It provided a path to redemption through religious purification. And most importantly, it justified the complete elimination of competing religious traditions. Asherah worship wasn't just wrong, it was the reason for national disaster. When Christianity emerged hundreds of years later from this reformed Jewish tradition, it inherited the sanitized version of monotheism as if it were the original truth. Early Christian theologians, influenced by Greek philosophy that emphasized the transcendent nature of divinity, had no use for earthly goddess worship or divine sexuality. The final nail in Asherah's coffin came when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine and his successors launched systematic campaigns to destroy pagan temples, burn religious texts, and eliminate any trace of the old gods, including the Hebrew goddess who had once ruled heaven alongside Yahweh. So, fortunately for us, here's the plot twist. They never completely succeeded in erasing Asherah. While mainstream Judaism and Christianity were busy removing her from official doctrine, underground traditions and even some mainstream denominations kept the forbidden goddess alive in ways that might surprise you. Let's start with one that most people are familiar with, the veneration of the Virgin Mary. Now, before any Catholics start writing angry comments, hear me out. The veneration of Mary in Catholic and Orthodox Christianity bears striking similarities to ancient Asherah worship that go far beyond coincidence. Both are intercessory figures who mediate between humans and the divine masculine. Both are associated with fertility, protection, and maternal care. Both are called Queen of Heaven in their respective traditions. Both are portrayed as crowned figures ruling from celestial thrones. The parallels are so extensive that some scholars argue that Mary is essentially Asherah in Christian clothing. As usual, none of this is coincidence. It's religious evolution. When Christianity spread into areas where goddess worship was deeply entrenched, early church leaders faced a practical problem. Rather than completely eliminate these beloved traditions and risk resistance, they made a strategic decision. They absorbed and transformed them. Mary became the acceptable face of the divine feminine in a nominally monotheistic religion. But the parallels go even deeper. Medieval Christian mysticism is saturated with feminine divine imagery that sounds suspiciously like Asherah worship. Hildegard of Bingen wrote about Sophia, divine wisdom personified as a female figure who participates in creation alongside God. Julian of Norwich described God in maternal terms, talking about Mother Jesus who nurtures humanity. Now, moving into the modern era, Jewish Kabbalistic traditions have maintained concepts remarkably similar to ancient Asherah worship. The Shekinah, described as the feminine presence of God in the world, bears striking resemblances to the ancient goddess. She's the divine bride, the nurturing mother, the wise woman who intercedes for humanity. Archaeological evidence shows that Jewish communities continued Asherah-like practices well into the medieval period. Excavations of medieval Jewish quarters have uncovered household shrines, fertility figurines, and ritual objects that suggest goddess worship never completely disappeared. It just went underground. And here's where it gets interesting for modern Americans. Some contemporary Christian denominations still acknowledge divine feminine principles that trace back to Asherah worship. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still believe in a Heavenly Mother who serves as the divine feminine counterpart to Heavenly Father. While they don't explicitly connect this figure to Asherah, the theological parallels are unmistakable. A divine wife and mother who participates in creation and rules heaven alongside the masculine divine. In the broader modern world, we're seeing an explosive revival of interest in Asherah and goddess spirituality. Neo-pagan movements, feminist theology, and even some progressive Jewish and Christian communities are actively rediscovering the divine feminine that was systematically erased from mainstream religion. So at the end of the day, why should you care about this forbidden goddess that religious authorities have spent 2,000 years trying to erase? Because the systematic erasure of Asherah represents something much bigger. It's a perfect case study in how those in power control narratives, shape reality, and determine what counts as acceptable truth in society. Just think about it. If religious authorities could successfully erase the wife of God from human consciousness for over 2,000 years, removing her from texts, destroying her temples, outlawing her worship, and convincing billions that monotheism was always the original truth, what other forbidden truths might they be hiding? What other inconvenient realities have been buried or rewritten to serve the interests of those in charge? The implications go far beyond religion. The systematic elimination of the divine feminine gave church authorities unprecedented control over what counted as acceptable spiritual belief. When you remove the goddess from heaven, you consolidate all divine authority into a single masculine figure controlled by male religious hierarchies. This wasn't accidental, it was a deliberate restructuring of cosmic order to support earthly power arrangements. Just think about what happened to people who ever disagreed with this new religious orthodoxy. The same church authorities who erased Asherah from history later burned heretics at the stake, launched crusades against competing belief systems, and established the Inquisition to torture and execute anyone who challenged their version of divine truth. When you control the narrative about God, you control the people who worship that God. And throughout history, challenging the church's monopoly on religious truth was often a death sentence. But here's what gives me hope. The digital age is making it increasingly impossible to maintain these kinds of cover-ups. Archaeological discoveries, scholarly research, and suppressed information that were once accessible only to academic elites are now available to anyone with an internet connection and the curiosity to dig deeper. And this is exactly why channels like Arnie's Brain Train exist, to take complex, often controversial, deliberately suppressed information and make it accessible to regular people who want to understand the real story behind the sanitized versions that they've been fed for their whole lives. The Asherah story reveals something crucial about truth itself. History isn't a neutral collection of objective facts. It's a carefully constructed narrative created by people with specific agendas and power to enforce their version of events. Understanding this doesn't make you a conspiracy theorist, it makes you a critical thinker who refuses to accept authority claims without evidence. Now, here's the kicker. This pattern of systematic erasure and reality manipulation isn't unique to ancient religion. It's happening right now with our contemporary institutions. The same mechanisms that eliminated Asherah from religious consciousness, controlling information flow, discrediting alternative sources, rewriting records, and punishing dissent, are actively being used today to shape public opinion and determine what counts as acceptable truth. When you understand how the wife of God was erased from history, you start to recognize the same patterns in how uncomfortable truths about politics, science, and social issues are handled today. The playbook hasn't changed, only the technology and the scale. Let's pull all these threads together now and talk about what we've learned. What we've discovered isn't just that God has a wife who got written out of history, it's that the very foundations of Western religion are built on edited, sanitized, politically motivated versions of much more complex traditions. The archaeological evidence is undeniable. Ancient Hebrew religion included widespread goddess worship alongside the masculine divine. The textual evidence shows systematic editing of sacred texts to eliminate these traditions. The historical evidence reveals deliberate campaigns to destroy physical evidence and rewrite religious narratives. But the most important connection is this. Understanding how authority figures manipulated religious truth in the past gives us the tools to recognize when the same techniques are being used today. Whether we're talking about ancient priests rewriting texts, medieval theologians burning books, or modern media controlling information flow, the fundamental playbook for narrative control remains remarkably consistent. The rediscovery of this forbidden goddess isn't just about recovering lost history. It's about reclaiming the right to ask difficult questions, challenge official narratives, seek truth regardless of whose feelings get hurt, and refuse to accept authority claims without demanding evidence. That's exactly what this show and this channel is all about. And there you have it, everybody. The story of the forbidden wife of God that they erased from history, and how this massive cover-up continues to shape how billions of people understand divinity, authority, and truth itself. If this journey through history has fired up your neurons and made you question everything you thought you knew about religion and power, smash that like button, subscribe for more mind-bending adventures, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a departure from this station. Drop a comment below. What other settled religious or historical facts do you think might be hiding more complex truths? Remember, all of my sources are listed in the description below because I actually back up my claims with evidence. Join us every week as we dive into new explosive topics, and until then, keep questioning authority, keep demanding evidence, and remember, the world isn't always this simple, but it's always this interesting. All aboard Arnie's Brain Train, where curiosity meets controversy, learning feels like an adventure, and no sacred cow is safe from investigation. See you guys there. Bye.